If you are thinking of moving to Malaga or somewhere else on the Costa del Sol, here are some pros and cons when it comes to moving to and living in this area. I have lived here for almost 3 years, and that is both in the city center of beautiful Malaga, but also other places on the coast. Alright, let's get started with the pros. So first of all, it's a very diverse region in the sense that if you live in the city center of Malaga, you feel like you're living in still a relatively small city, but it is a city. It has a nice historic feel, but if you like a more quiet space, you can move to somewhere else in the Costa del Sol, especially east of Malaga is very quiet. So whether you prefer the city, a village, or right on the beach, or directly in the countryside, well, you have many options in this region. And next on the list is the climate. This might be a relatively obvious one. The region has many sunny days, only 2 to 3 months of downright cold-ish weather, and also only around 2 months of really warm weather, around 35 degrees. In addition, nothing rarely gets cancelled because of the weather, and that is really nice if you enjoy doing things outside. Okay, enough about the weather. Let's move on to the next pro, which is the cost of living, which is relatively cheap, at least compared to many other Western European countries. And this region, so that is Andalucia, is also typically cheaper than many other parts of Spain, but of course some touristy areas are gonna be expensive. Unless you insist on living right in the historic center of Malaga or right on the beach in a popular area, you can find relatively affordable rent. In addition, there are many restaurants that will not blow your budget, and you can just sit and enjoy a nice glass of wine in the sun. And speaking of the sun, Malaga and Costa del Sol has many nice beaches. On top of the beaches, there are also lakes that are really nice for swimming. And during the summer months, the water gets nice and warm. Some beaches have waves, others don't, so depending on if you're with children, you can take your pick. And speaking of the beach, there are also other nice outdoorsy activities you can do on the Costa del Sol. So for example, hiking, rock climbing, swimming in lakes, and other types of water activities. And in addition, there is the Sierra Nevada ski resort, which is open during the winter months, and that is also a very nice place to visit. In other words, you are not gonna run out of things to do anytime soon. Alright, and the last pro on this list is the airport. So Malaga Airport is a well-connected airport, and you can even take this train directly to your terminal. Okay, so those were the pros. Let's move on to the cons, and I'll just let you know that at the end of the video, I'll give you my little spin on what I think are the most important pros and the most important cons as well from my perspective. Okay, let's go and start with the first disadvantage, which in my perspective is also the most important one in many ways, and that is the amount of tourists that are down here. So basically, during the high season months, it can be very difficult to do anything because there are so many people everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean on the beach, at the restaurants, on the streets, anywhere you want to go is going to be packed. If you are the type of person who likes to drive somewhere and find a remote beach and sit there by yourself and just enjoy the solitude, well then this region is not for you because such a beach is very difficult to find. In addition, many activities that you have to book in advance, such as the famous Caminito del Rey, well, you will also have to book this in advance, and many times far in advance. The same goes for places like Aranda and many other popular destinations. And another tourism-related disadvantage of this area is the lack of a Spanish atmosphere. So because there are so many foreigners, both tourists and also foreigners that are permanently living in Spain, well then you can get to forget that you are actually in Spain, because there are very few Spanish people in some areas, and English and French and German and whatnot are spoken more than actual Spanish. Now you can make a deliberate decision to try and avoid other foreigners and the most touristy areas, but it is difficult to avoid running into these areas that do definitely not feel authentically Spanish. Another con when it comes to living in this area has to do with the jobs that are available. So if you plan on moving down here and finding a job, well, the job market is a bit limited, especially for foreigners, and there are a lot of call centers. Now, maybe you don't mind working in a call center. The problem is that many times the salaries are going to be quite low, and in many cases lower than what you're used to if you come from another Western country. On top of that, unfortunately, there is also a tendency for foreigners to go down to the south of Spain and set up these not so legit call centers, so you might end up working for a scam, but of course, this is not the case for all call centers. So, for the last con on the list, I've chosen to include the aspect that is an excessive alcohol culture. And by this I mean that you will see many bars with foreigners, sometimes pensioners, just sitting and drinking all day, and this creates a bit of an alcoholic atmosphere in many areas, and it can be a little bit depressing to watch in the long run. And now those were all the pros and the cons that I had for you today. So I've lived here for almost 3 years, and I would have to say that overall I think it is a very nice place to live, and I think other people will agree. I do think that the pros outweigh the cons for me. I went on a city tour recently with a guide in Malaga, and he said something very interesting about this area that I think is very true. He said how maybe Malaga doesn't have the most beautiful beaches, maybe it doesn't have the highest mountains, maybe it doesn't have this big city center, but it has a little bit of everything, a little bit of history, a little bit of the beach, very good weather. So altogether, it is a very nice place to live, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and see you in the next one. Bye!